Welcome to On the Soul's Terms podcast, a weaving of astrology, Greek mythology, and depth psychology. I'm Chris Skidmore, an astrologer, psychotherapist, and craniosacral therapist living in Ubud, Bali. Welcome back to On the Soul's Terms podcast, and today we'll be continuing on the story of Hercules as he makes his way through his labors. I'd recommend going back and listening to Hercules Part 1 and Hercules Part 2, and you'll be able to get yourself up to speed. But just to have a quick run through, we started with Hercules' birth. We went through his life, his early life, his killing of his music teacher accidentally. His also accidental violence against his family and how that led to these labors. And we've just come out of the labor where he was looking for the Erymanthian Boar. He's managed to bring that boar back to Eurystheus and complete that task. But along the way, there was the chaos, if you remember, of the centaurs and, visiting his old friend Pholus the centaur, who had a jar of Dionysian wine. He opened up that wine and he really opened up the whole chaotic world of wildness, and everything just came flooding in. All the centaurs came at him and they ended up scattered all over the world. Pholus ends up dying accidentally. Chiron ends up wounded accidentally, and it's really quite a chaotic scene. So although he manages to bring back the boar, there's all sorts of collateral damage that happen along the way. And you'll see that in the myths of Hercules. He's not the brightest spark, but he means well. He definitely means well, but in his well-meaning ways, he often creates quite a lot of mayhem. So for today, I'd like to look at the fifth labor, which is the Augean Stables, and the sixth labor, which is the Stymphalian birds, and just have a look at those as he completes his first six of the labors. That gets us halfway. And that's quite significant, this halfway point for Hercules, because these are what's known as the local labors, and that's all around the Peloponnese. So we could take that into the soul's journey as meaning the personal journey, And then once he's completed those six labors, much like once we've completed the first six signs of the zodiac, not that anything's ever completed, but we get through those first six processes, then we enter the world. And so the final six labors is where he enters the world and he takes on more of an international sphere. So the first labor of those two, the Augean Stables, we'll be looking at today. And Eurystheus has given him a task, and you can see Eurystheus quite pleased with himself giving him this task. He sent him in quite a humiliating way off to the king Augeus, whose stables are just full of cow dung. And they're just completely full. And the task set to Hercules is that he's going to have to go there, and in the space of just one day, he's got to clean out the whole stables. So Eurystheus was really delighting in this idea that Hercules, the great hero, would be reduced to such a role of getting his hands dirty, being covered in this gunk, putting big stacks of it onto his broad shoulders and taking it off and then coming back again. And he just thought it was quite a delightful scene. Now, how the Augean Stables got to this point is that the king there, as I said, Augeus, he was extremely wealthy, particularly in the realm of cattle. And the reason for that was he'd been blessed to have the kind of cattle that they never really get sick, they're always fertile, and they never miscarry. So there's this kind of endless, it's not just that he has so many cattle, they just constantly are creating more cattle. So you might be able to hear in that, with all this talk of cows and bulls, a bit of the Taurian archetype here, where this wealth creation part of the archetype of the fixed earth sign of Taurus. And we'll see as we go along the Augean Stables and this whole task of Hercules, it has a lot of those fixed signs in it. So it has some of Taurus, some of Scorpio, some of Leo, a little bit of Leo, and a lot of Aquarius. And so this guy, this king, he's gotten so wealthy, but he's not very good at maintaining his stables. He's not very good at cleaning things up. He doesn't really think about that. And so he's this symbol, in a way, of so much accumulation of wealth to so few. But then it's actually causing damage and trouble in the rest of the Peloponnese. And it even states that there's pestilence and famine and death going on all around the Peloponnese just from the toxic buildup that's gone on in these stables. So it's really causing quite a menace. So in a way, Eurystheus is sending Hercules there to really take care of this problem. And oftentimes within Hercules' labors, there is some greater good that Hercules is working for. Like, for instance, with the Hydra. You know, that Hydra was going around decimating the land and causing trouble and killing and causing all sorts of problems. Same with the lion in his first labor. Was not just a lion, it was a monstrous lion that was causing all sorts of damage and trouble. So it happens sometimes that he's doing something for the greater good, and this is definitely one of those times. And so you can put yourself in Hercules' shoes here as he wanders in, and he keeps quite a distance from the stables as he comes in, because it really is a stench going on there. So he makes contact with the king, Augeus, first, and quite craftily, actually, he makes a deal with him. So he says to him, if he can clear out all of the dung that is being captured into the stables and causing all these troubles, if he can do it within a day, then the king will give him 1/10 of his wealth. So that is the deal that he strikes. And of course, Augeus is looking at this guy. You know, he's had this build up in his stables for obviously quite some time, and the thought of it being able to be done in a day is so absurd to him that he has a good laugh and he says, "Sure, that's fine with me." And so he brings in his son Phileus, and who comes in as a witness to the deal that's being made, and Phileus witnesses the agreement that if Hercules can do this before sundown, then he will give him 1/10 of all of his wealth. And so here we are in this scene where we've got just a stench happening. It's destroying the countryside. The world is getting worse off for it. It kind of makes us think in a way of, you know, the world as it is today, where, I mean, it's very well documented that more and more wealth is getting into fewer and fewer hands, you know. I actually remember when I was studying economics back at university, the idea of free market capitalism was the trickle down effect. That was the idea, a little bit like our myth today. The trickle down effect. It's a bit of a myth in the modern sense of the word myth. That idea was that if the rich got really rich, they would become more and more generous, and then they would share more and more and build communities, and everybody down the line from the wealthy would also become wealthy. Now, that's the idea, that's the ideal. But we can see in the world that it's much more like the Augean Stables. You know, it's very clear that it doesn't trickle down. It doesn't move. It's like these stables. It's like the bulls are the wealth, and their dung is where it gets stuck. And that fixed energy, that fixed earth energy is not moving anywhere. The stables aren't cleared out ever, and there's just a real build up of this crap, basically. Or as we could say, bullshit, as maybe the word bullshit comes back to this myth. I don't know. It seems to me to be a viable place where it comes from. So, you know, Hercules does something quite ingenious here, and I have questioned whether he gets some help, because it's not his usual style to have this kind of foresight and wisdom. So my sense here is that Athena comes in to help him. But anyway, what he does is, rather than that fantasy that Eurystheus had, that he would go in and roll up his sleeves and be covered in crap and take big baskets of this stuff out. Rather than that, he breaks 2 holes in the stables and diverts 2 nearby rivers. And then the water just flows through at a great speed, and it's really cleared out in no time at all. So it's all cleared out in no time at all. It's quite a striking image. I'm sure that that you either know of this story already, or now that I tell it to you in the podcast, you are familiar with it or you remember it, because it's one that, you know, the Augean Stables is something that is in our vernacular to an extent, and people know of this. And to me, there's multiple levels and layers to the story of what's really going on, and I'd like to explore the symbol of diverting these rivers. And you know, firstly, I'll start with the image of Aquarius, who's known as the water bearer. And you know, part of Aquarius as the final air sign of the zodiac is that it's looking to think clearly. That is the ideal. It's looking to think clearly. And but like the myth, what can happen is the gathering of more and more information ends up getting stuck. And it's like that in our own minds, isn't it? It's like the gathering of information ends up where we can't think straight. We've just got more and more competing information, and it's gathering itself up, and it's like there's all of this dung that gets caught up in the stables. And so the diverting of the river is like the water bearer who's able to pour down something refreshing, something nourishing, and clean out and cleanse our minds so that we can, in fact, think straight. Now, I was thinking about that in terms of obviously a more collective sense, like, because Aquarius has that collective consciousness that it relates to. That's why it rules things like the internet and social media and things, because these are collective intelligences, or AI, because that's a collective intelligence. So on that level, you know, the systems and structures of thought, like the paradigms that we have in the world, can get stuck, and they need to be opened up sometimes. You can look at that on multiple levels around the world. I mean, we're coming into the election in the US in the next month, and that's a really good one to look at, of like this old archaic system that ends up being that only a few states, which means really only a few tens of thousands or maybe hundreds of thousands of people, end up deciding the president, because most votes in that system don't count. That's a system that really needs a redirecting of the river and a clearing out of all the nonsense and the bullshit. So we can look at it on that collective level. But something I've been thinking about today, and over the last few weeks as I've been contemplating this image, is really how in the modern day, since the advent of social media and the way that the algorithms are cornering our minds and, you know, keep feeding us the same things, right? Like, we all know this by now. We were all very familiar that the things that we're being presented by our social media or YouTube or these different things, or even our news outlets, it's very selective, and it's pushing us all into these corners. So whilst the ideal of Aquarius is to have that freedom, because that's very much a Aquarian idea, like freedom of thought, you know, the ability to make my own mind up, the ability to communicate with my peers and to communicate with people across the divide, and you know, communicate with people with different ideas so that I can get a better sense of the truth, because the truth is really what Aquarius is aiming at. In the last, you know, 10, 15, maybe 20 years, that's been more and more difficult. And so instead of having this free flow, what we've got is that we're all stuck in our own little corner of the labyrinth in a way. You know, and that's caused such division and such separation, and to the point where it's all like we're all in different stories and we can't connect to the same story. And so that's where a story like this can come along of, well, how do I really open up those two channels? You know, it's interesting that it's two rivers. So how do I open up the two channels of information and let it come through and sort of clear me out and clear out my mind? Because the mind really does we think of the mind as this floating kind of air-like thing, but in fact, as per the symbols behind Aquarius, it can get very fixed and fixated. It can get very stuck on things, and I think there's no better symbol for that than the Augean Stables, where our minds are cluttered, and rather than try to clear it out, we just try to get more information. So then maybe we'll be able to understand things better if we get more information. But that's essentially just piling shit on shit, isn't it? As per this analogy, the more information we get, the more it's getting clogged up. And so I think about this image as like opening up the channels as just kind of a way to clear that out. There's obviously many ways in the world, and that's one of the great things that has come through the information ages. We also have access to meditation, to yoga, to Taoism, Tai Chi, Qigong, all these ways that we can sort of open up the channels. And I think, especially in Chinese medicine, they see it as the rivers. The meridians are like the rivers that run through, and when they do get clogged up, our system gets clogged up, and we become unhealthy according to that frame of seeing the world. So how do we just open that up and let the flow come back, and trust that by the absence of something we actually can think clearer, rather than in this world where the kind of the lie of it all now is that by getting more and more information, then we'll be able to make really intelligent decisions. And sometimes that's true, but sometimes also the opposite is true, that we're just piling on top of unprocessed. That's what the shit in this story can represent, is the unprocessed information. And rather than clearing that out, we just put more unprocessed information and more processed information on top of each other. And another layer of this image was, to me, as I was contemplating, is the opening up to the waters in particular. So if I think about water as an element that comes into this very kind of barren story, because ultimately that's what it is. It's like the whole of the Peloponnese has gone barren, and it's gone lifeless, and has become somewhat soulless, which can also be the result of this ultimately materialist view. Because that's really what's happened in this story as well. It's become hyper-materialist, again, as represented by these bulls and by the material wealth that's being gathered up by the king, Augeus. And so as all of that materialism has come through, it's like a symbol of that concretism of ideas. It's like there's no freshness of ideas. And so the bringing in of the water on another level is the bringing in of that soulfulness and that feeling function. Jung had his typologies, and the thinking function and the feeling function were in opposition to each other. And it's like the world has pulled itself into the thinking function and really lost touch with that feeling function. And so we become soulless, we become machine-like, we become robotic, which is another thing of this kind of Aquarian paradigm that we're wrestling with and struggling with at this time. So the opening of the waters is a bringing back of the soul. In fact, in my travels recently, I was in Florence, and I went to the Uffizi Gallery, which is where Botticelli's work is. And it's amazing to see, it really sets that gallery up so well as an interactive and immersive experience. And you feel like you're walking through time in a way. And you're sort of preparing yourself as you walk through all of these images. Incredible artistry is going on. But the images themselves feel like they don't have all that much soul. And then you go into this one room and you enter, and it's Botticelli. Firstly, you start with Botticelli's master, and you end up in Botticelli's room. And right in the middle of the room is the birth of Venus. And I'm sure everybody that listens to the podcast is likely familiar. But if you're not, just Google right now Botticelli's Venus or Botticelli birth of Venus, and you'll see it. And this was a time when, the world was in a really dark place. So we'd had 1,000 years of the Dark Ages, and the artistry that suddenly burst through the Renaissance, which of course means the rebirth. It's like the soul was coming back, which is perfectly articulated symbolically at that moment with the birth of Venus. So this was a time when suddenly translations of the old Greek stories, which we talk about a lot in this show, had come back on the scene and enlivened the images and enlivened the imagination. And that was really the beginnings. Botticelli's Birth of Venus was like the beginnings of the Renaissance. So in a way, it's like he through Botticelli and through the other artists of that time, it's like the opening up of those rivers and the allowing of the soul to come back in. And the rebirth of Venus, in a way, it was the rebirth of beauty and the rebirth of our reverence for the image again. It's like the reverence for the imagination again. And look at the results of that if you've ever been to Florence and seen just how stunning the art that comes through, all of the incredible statues. Obviously, Michelangelo's David is also there in Florence, and many other incredible images from that time. This is in history where this moment happens, where something is cleared out and we can finally see clearly again, or we can at least see not just with one eye, but the other eye also comes on. And in our time, we're in this paradigm of materialism and logical literalism, and it's hard for us to step out of that. And I think in the same way, we open up to the waters, and then we open up to the soulfulness. And that's certainly something I try to bring forward in this show on the soul's terms. I mean, it's named that for the waters. It's named that to bring back some of that imaginative process and all of these old stories and such. It's also interesting timing for this particular podcast because right now in the sky, Pluto, god of the underworld, and also Pluto, which means wealth, is at 29 degrees of Capricorn. And it is right now stationing direct. So what that means is it's been going backwards in the sky from the Earth's perspective for a while, and now it's turning around and it's about to go forward again. And why that is significant right now is that this is its last part of its time in Capricorn, and it's about to go into the sign of Aquarius for good. I've mentioned it before on the podcast, the last 18 months, it's been this transitional period where Pluto has been moving between Capricorn on the one hand and Aquarius on the other. So we get this movement. And I think the symbol of these stables might be something that can really resonate through this transitional period. Once Pluto goes in, which is around November 10th, that Pluto will go into Aquarius. It's going to be there now for 20 years. It's had, I think it's been 5 times that it's gone back and forth between Capricorn and Aquarius, and now it's going into Aquarius basically for good. In our lifetime, this is it. It's going to stay there for the next 20 years. It won't be back in Capricorn for, another few centuries. So that's always a significant moment. And for those that know the astrology, you can look at these ingresses, is what it's called, of Pluto, and see quite significant changes. The last one being 2008, which was the global financial crisis and the failure of banks and all this kind of stuff, which was when Pluto moved into Capricorn, which does rule financial structures. So now Pluto's moving into paradigms, right? It's moving into fixed ideas. And in a way, the potential that I see is the opening up of these two rivers and the clearing out of a lot of this noise and nonsense. But who knows exactly how it goes? Obviously, usually with Pluto processes, because Pluto is a process of revelation, things can tend to get worse before they get better, and we certainly see that happening in the world. But just knowing that, one of the things I'd like to address actually as we talk about this Pluto process is that, Pluto, because he's god of the underworld, can get caught up in images of the devil or the demonic kind of thing. But that's not really who Pluto is at all. I think that's just a product of our more monotheistic thinking of good and evil. Of course, in the myths, Pluto was not evil. He was not bad. He got up to some bad stuff, but so did all of the gods. Every god had its shadow, and Hades or Pluto was not an exception to that. And so sometimes when we sense a Pluto transit coming up, we can have a lot of fear around that. But actually, this is a good image for me of a Pluto transit of, it gives us the chance to really clear things out. That could be a painful process. Clearing things out can be a painful process. But also there is that kind of catharsis and that clearing, much like these Augean Stables, that can be, the result of a Pluto process can be a real clearing out of our consciousness. And we got to say, it's timely for Pluto to be going into Aquarius. I think there's a lot of reckoning that has to happen with the manipulation of our collective minds by these little black machines that we carry around in our pockets, that are really not designed to do us any favors. I mean, do you know anyone, including yourself, that doesn't struggle with these little things? It's like the most highly addictive thing maybe that we've ever created in human consciousness, the most absurd thing. And it grabs at us and it pushes us and it keeps our attention and it makes us go for it. I mean, we've had so many different things even in the last 100 years, like cigarettes. And when we figure out cigarettes are bad for us, we do something about it, right? Like, or many other things. I mean, I was about to say sugar, but maybe we haven't quite figured that one out just yet. But once we figure out something is like collectively bad on a massive scale, the humans, we tend to do something about it. So what are we going to do about these little machines? And I think that Pluto and Aquarius may help us with that, and that we may come up with ways to help each other, because this isn't an individual addiction. This is a collective addiction, and we really do need to redirect the rivers. So there's lots more that you can do with this image. I invite you just to really sit with it. The stables. In the end, of course, Hercules does clear it out in a day and goes back to the king and says, "Okay, I did it. So give me 1/10 of your cattle." And of course, the king flatly refuses to do that. And they end up in court, and all this other drama happens. It's quite wild. So they end up in court. The Hercules brings forward Phileus, Augeus's son, and he testifies against his father. Then they get kicked out. Then they bring back an army. Then they replace him. I mean, it's madness. I don't really want to go into too much of that, but it's interesting that the court system shows up, that justice shows up, and all these kinds of elements show up in the myth of the Augean Stables. And just as a little side note, when all is said and done, and Hercules has helped this kid basically take the throne off and completely displaced Augeus with his greedy and materialist ways. He's replaced him with his son. He then goes up and sets up the Olympic Games, which takes place every 4 years from that point onwards. It's even said that he walks out the stadium himself, measures out the entire Olympic stadium with his own steps. So he sets up the Olympic Games dedicated to Zeus, his father, from then on, and that is something that really has gone all the way to our modern day, including the year 2024. So after all of that, when Hercules finally goes back to Eurystheus, he actually doesn't count this labor, much like the Hydra. He doesn't count the Hydra labor because he gets help. He doesn't count this labor because Hercules actually profits from it. So that's why we end up having 12 labors, because these 2 of these 10 labors don't count, this being one of them. So then, in a similar symbol, I think, and the 6th of his first 6 labors, so the final one of the 6, Hercules is then asked to go back out there and take on these things called the Stymphalian birds. They're said to be brazen-beaked, brazen-clawed, brazen-winged, man-eating birds, and they're sacred to Ares or Mars, and they're causing absolute havoc, as you can imagine. So with their bronzed claws, wings, and beaks, they can kill humans, and often do. And they're all hiding in a swamp in a marshland. They fly out and then they attack. So in a way, this symbol, it's a little bit similar, I feel, to the Augean Stables in that it's but it's the mind, it almost feels like fever dreams, how the mind can go wild and completely out of control. In the Augean Stables, we have the symbol of the mind being stuck, and the next symbol is the sort of frantic mind that can sort of tear you apart from the inside. Hercules' way of handling this, he's helped by Athena and Hephaestus. Hephaestus has made him some castanets. It's also made of bronze, these castanets, or as some say it's a rattle. And he makes a bunch of noise and gets these things going. It's almost like a cathartic episode to just like get everything moving again. And then once they've started moving, he shoots them all down with his bow and arrow, and he's able to take them out. We had the problem that was related to bulls, so more Taurian, and now we have a problem that's related to Ares, so more Aries-like. And, the essential parts of the human psyche, we can get bogged down in our own nonsense and bullshit on the one hand, and our mind can really turn against us sometimes when it just gets hectic, like it can't settle down. It's an interesting one if I think of bodywork processes. The mind can either be hyperactive in the sense of these Stymphalian birds, or it can also be hypoactive in the sense of all of that dung that's got caught up, like, it's like sluggish and unable to process itself. So in this labor, it's a pretty simple one for mine. The symbol to me is just of that kind of madness of the mind, and he's helped by both Athena and Hephaestus. So he's helped with the smith god and the rational goddess, and they just help him get through this one, and it brings us down to the end of his local labors. So if we think about that, what is it to have 6 of Hercules' labors as local, and the second 6 of them to be international? What is that really saying? In talking with my mentor Brian Clark about this, he sees it as the more personal and individual labors of the first 6, and the labors of being in the world of the second 6. That's one way to see it. So that kind of individuation, it's much like the zodiac itself. If you look at the first 6 signs that take you up to Virgo, that's the labors that just help you individuate and become yourself. But then once we move from Virgo into Libra, which we've just done recently, we move into that next phase where we enter the world. And we enter the world through Libra. We make some contracts. We find love. We find connection, and that takes us into a whole different sequence. So when we come back to Hercules, he will now be an international superhero, and we'll be able to see what he gets up to next. He's going to be tracking the Cretan bull, which is the bull that led to the labyrinth. Basically, the bull is the father of the Minotaur, who is in the labyrinth. So, his first task is to travel over to Crete. So you can see he's already leaving the Peloponnese behind, and he's going out into the world, and he's seeing if his skills and his strengths and his determination and his heroicness can be of use out there in the rest of the world. But we will get to that next time. I hope you enjoyed the symbols that we were exploring today with Hercules and his Augean Stables. And to me, it's one that the imagination can come back to again and again of when my mind is clogged and when I'm caught in particular ways of thinking, and I can hopefully open up the channels again, much like as I talked about the Taoist sort of chi way, and allow the flow to re-enter my world. And I hope this allows your flow to re-enter, and let's hope on a collective level Pluto and Aquarius can also help our more collective flow to come into the world. More beauty, more truth, get over this idea of that we're in a post-truth world and focus our energy on finding the reality of things again, which is symbolized by Botticelli's Birth of Venus. You know, when Venus is born back into the world, truth is also born into the world, and let's hope and pray that on a collective level that can happen once again. I thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you for listening to On the Soul's Terms podcast. To support the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review, sharing with friends, or becoming a patron at patreon.com/onthesoulsterms. Until next time.